So why don't we take a moment to just allow our minds to settle a little bit so we can sit comfortably with our backs straight as comfortable. And just allow our attention to settle on the sensations of our breathing. Just pick a spot on the body where you can notice the rhythm of the breath as it comes in and goes out. Just let your mind rest on noticing that sensation, those sensations. And when the mind wanders, which it will do, just notice that and gently bring it back again. Then we can think about our purpose for being together today. And we think that we're here really ultimately because we want to maximize our understanding and our ability to create happiness where it's lacking, to reduce and remove suffering where it's present. Not just for ourselves, but everywhere that those things may be absent or present respectively. So everything we do today, we do with that intention, with that motivation, maximizing happiness and decreasing suffering in the deepest, truest possible ways. And so with that thought in our heart, can open our eyes if they were closed, and we can talk. All right. So today, I wanted to start by following up on some of the things we had started talking about last week in terms of how do we make sense of the Buddhist teachings in light of the fact that they tell us that we're supposed to figure things out for ourselves, and at the same time they give us certain answers, right? What are we to do with those answers if not if it's not the case that we're supposed to just believe them and kind of swallow them? And I think one thing that's helpful to think about in that context is the concept of faith. And Buddhism does have lots of things to say about faith. And what I find most interesting in the Buddhist discussion of faith is that it comes up in two different contexts. It comes up in the context of what's called Buddhist Epistemology, which is epistemology is the study of how do we know what we know, like how do we know what we can be confident in. And it also comes up in the context of Buddhist psychology, which is about how the mind works and what are the states of mind that are helpful to the mind, what are the states of mind that are unhelpful to the mind. But maybe a more accurate thing to say would be that the thing that Buddhism is talking about in epistemology that we call faith, and the thing that Buddhism is talking about in psychology, which we also call faith, it's almost just a funny, weird coincidence, if I may put it that way, that in English we use the same word for both of those things, because they're talking about two very different things. So let me speak a little bit about that, and then of course I'd like to hear from you guys, not just in terms of anything I might be saying, but also in terms of anything else that you think might be helpful. But Buddhist epistemology, and we're not going to get into all of the nitty-gritty of it. It gets very precise and very technical. But Buddhist epistemology talks about what it calls 7 ways of knowing something, right? 7 ways. So this would be, it's hard to find a simple way of putting it in English, but it's 7 ways. Like if our mind has an object that it's relating with, it's like 7 different ways that our mind can relate with that object. So just to give you an example, one way is that we could have a direct perception of something. So I have a glass of water, and the way my mind is relating to this glass of water, at least in part, is through direct perception, visually, tactile, taste, and so on, right? Another way that the mind can relate to something is that the mind can know something is the case through what we would call perfect reasoning. So for example, you all saw me hold up a glass of water, and now you don't see the glass of water anymore, right? So you don't have a direct perception. So here, right now, you have a direct perception of, if we're being very precise, you have a direct perception of pixels that are a representation of a glass of water. But let's just simplify it and say you have a direct perception of a glass of water, right? And now you don't anymore. And yet, you can know with confidence that the glass of water didn't just pop out of existence, that there is still a glass of water here somewhere, right? And that's not a matter of faith, at least not how we would normally think of it. It's a very, very strong logical assumption based on what we know about how the world works. Well, 2 of the 7 ways of knowing are what we might term faith in English. One of them is what we might perhaps more precisely refer to as a correct assumption. And the other is what we might call a wrong cognition. Okay. Oh, one thing I should have said, of the 7 ways of knowing, only 2 of them are considered to be valid. There are 2 valid ways of knowing something, and it's the 2 that I just gave the example of. Direct perception is valid, and there you have to test that the perception isn't distorted, but then it's valid. And a perfect logical reasoning is also valid. And you have to be very careful to test that it's perfect, and Buddhism has a whole lot to say about that. The other 5 are not valid. And both of the things that we would call faith fall under those other 5, right? You can have a correct assumption, you can have a wrong cognition. So if I believe that the moon is made of green cheese, that would be considered a wrong cognition. I could have faith that the moon is made of green cheese, but that's a wrong cognition. It's just not true, right? And I could have my reasons for thinking it or whatever, but it's still not true. And so that type of faith is considered, of course, completely unreliable in Buddhism. Now, sometimes I might have faith in something and I might just get it right. It's very interesting. For example, I had an example on the tip of my tongue and it's just escaped me. But, yes, here's one. Christopher Columbus had faith that he could set sail going westward, and that he would strike land before he ran out of supplies, right? He had faith. And by golly, he was right. You know, the people say like, oh, Columbus, like, you know, he's the one who discovered the earth was round. That's not true at all. Everybody knew that the earth was round. The reason nobody was sailing west is because they knew that the earth is very large. And so before you got to India, you'd have run out of supplies. Columbus was wrong. He thought the earth is actually a lot smaller than we think it is, which it isn't, right? And so I'll get to India really quickly, and then I'll surprise you all, ha, 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 right? And so he set sail. He didn't get to India. He would have run out of supplies and died had it not been for the fact that the Americas were there, right? And so, and history is just littered with examples of that kind, actually. And so he had what we would call, if we think about it from the perspective of he was assuming that he would hit land before he ran out of supplies, that was a correct assumption, right? That was a correct assumption because he got freaking lucky, right? And I'll just add this more little bit of detail just because it's so juicy, I think, that Buddhism even goes to the trouble of distinguishing three kinds of correct assumptions. There's correct assumptions where we have no reason behind it, you know? So, for example, if a kid just memorizes in school some fact, you know, about the world, like you know, they can memorize in school that the moon is not made of green cheese, it's made of moonstone or something. And if you say, why? Like, how do you know that? I don't know, right? Or that, oh, I remember one time I was teaching test prep or something, and I went to this class, and we were doing a math problem on the board, and we ended up with the square root of x squared, right? As I said, and so what's the square root of x squared? And none of the kids knew. They had no idea. I said, well, what's the square root of anything squared? And they had no idea. But if you say, what's the square root of 64? They know it's 8. What's the square root of 9? They know it's 3, right? So they've memorized it, but they have no idea what's going on, right? So they might have a correct assumption without any reason. That's one type. Another type of correct assumption is when you have a correct assumption with a wrong reason, right? That would be like if you do a math problem and you do it all wrong, but just by chance and luck, you happen to get the right answer at the end, you know? It's like, you know, what's 10 minus 5? Well, 10 minus 5, well, let's see. You know, like, well, I think what you have to do is you have to take the 1 because 10 begins with 1, right? The 0 is nothing, so you don't do anything. And then you multiply it by the other number, 5. So 1 times 5 is 5. So it must be 5. Say, all right, you got it right, but that's not why, right? So that's a correct assumption with the wrong reason. And then, and this is where this gets so fascinating. You can have a correct assumption with a correct reason, which means that you know what the answer is and you know why, and the reason that you have is correct, but you don't get it. You don't understand what you're saying, right? And I think that's probably where most of us, certainly myself included, stand with respect to like most scientific discoveries. You know, it's like, I know that water is H2O, and I know that that means that it's 2 parts hydrogen and 1 part oxygen. And I know that blah, 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 but I have no freaking clue. Like, I don't know, you know, it's faith. It's faith is what it is, right? It's a correct assumption, I'm assuming, with a correct reason, I'm assuming, but damned if I know, right? Now, all of that, even though it's correct, even though you're landing on the correct answer, all of that in Buddhism is still considered to be invalid. It's unreliable. For one thing, you can think about it this way. Each of us in individual, like each of us from within our own experience, we can never know whether something we believe is a correct assumption or whether it's a wrong cognition, right? If we don't really get it, if we don't really see it and understand it for ourselves, if it's an assumption, then it might turn out that we're lucky and it's a correct assumption, or it might turn out that we're unlucky and it's a wrong cognition. Do you get what I'm saying? Do you understand what I said? So for those reasons, in Buddhist epistemology, faith, at what we would call faith, is considered invalid, you know? So if somebody says, all composed phenomena are impermanent, all composed phenomena are, like the Buddha taught this, not all phenomena are impermanent, but all composed phenomena are impermanent, meaning all phenomena that depend on causes and effects coming together. Whatever is caused is impermanent, right? Buddha taught this. And so we might like Buddhism. And so we might hear that and we might say, all composed phenomena are impermanent, right? If we go on from there believing that, then that will be a matter of faith. That will be a correct assumption without any reason. Without any reason. Like because somebody said so is considered to be no reason in this context, right? And if you think about the concept of dogma, dogma would be an assumption, whether correct or incorrect, but an assumption without any reason. We might then also take that and we might say to ourselves, all right, all composed phenomena are impermanent. Oh, because whatever begins has to end, right? Because whatever has a beginning necessarily has to end. Well, sir, from a Buddhist point of view, that would be a correct assumption with an incorrect reason. From a Buddhist point of view, it's not true that everything that begins necessarily ends, right? That's not what makes things impermanent. It's very interesting. And then we could say, all composed phenomena are impermanent because necessarily if something comes together through the combination of causes, then other conditions must need to sustain it from moment to moment. And so the thing in itself and under its own power can't last more than 1 moment at a time. Aha. But we have no idea what we just said, right? That would be a correct assumption with a correct reason. And so in Buddhism, what we're striving to do is we're striving to develop certainty in things by developing one of the two valid ways of knowing, one of the two infallible ways of knowing. We either want to see directly for ourselves, or we want to like truly grasp the airtight logic and check and make sure that there are no errors and no ambiguities and nothing like that, so that we can, it's almost like then we can answer questions that we haven't memorized the answer to yet. You know, if you truly understand what square roots and squaring numbers are, if you get it, then I could give you any number. I could say 7,000,003. Okay, what's the square root of 7,000,003 squared? And you'll know the answer, right? You know that it's 7,000,003 because you didn't just memorize something. You're not just relying on something you've heard or something like that. You can understand. It's almost like you can see it for yourself. You can understand it for yourself. And then there's no doubt. There's no doubt. I sit here with zero worry that someday scientists will discover that the square root of 7,000,003 squared is something other than 7,000,003. It's not going to happen. We're never going to discover a four-sided triangle. We're just not, right? Anyway. So this is how these things tie together. The way these things tie together is that what the Buddha is telling us are certain conclusions, right? But the Buddha is certain conclusions that, let's say, he came to. But the Buddha isn't saying, and so now you have to believe this, with one of the three types of correct assumption, right? That doesn't work. The Buddha is saying, actually, don't do that. The Buddha is saying, here's my conclusion, and here's the evidence, here's the proof, right? Now go and make it your own. Check for mistakes. Check. It's almost like peer reviewing, As Buddhists, if we find a mistake, it's our duty, it's our responsibility, if we care about other sentient beings, to point it out. We would need to broadcast it. We need to say, there's a mistake in the Buddhist reasoning that establishes rebirth. There's an assumption in the Buddhist reasoning that establishes karma, right? Let alone, there are claims that this type of meditation will lead to this type of result, but my direct experience of it was that it does not, right? All of that is important. All of that is important. And I remember being at Kopan Monastery in 2003, and Ani Karen, who was the nun who was teaching us, she said, I've been looking for mistakes for, I forget how many years she said, and I just haven't found them yet. And I think that's kind of where I stand with it myself for now. I have a few words to say about faith from a psychological point of view, but before I do, let me just ask if anybody has any thoughts, questions, commentary, objections. Okay. So I think that is where the concept of faith would fall from the perspective of Buddhist epistemology. Now, what about from the perspective of Buddhist psychology? So in Buddhist psychology is a remarkably sophisticated, beautiful thing that takes all the types of mental experience that we can possibly have of any sort and breaks it down into its most basic components. It's almost like looking at emotions on the atomic level, emotions and thoughts and beliefs and all of that on the atomic level. And there's a traditional list of 52 what they call mental factors, like kind of types of mental experience. But that list is just representative. There's an infinite number of them. But one of the 50, and those 52, they're divided into, there's different ways of saying it, but we can say like they're divided into three kind of categories. There are certain mental factors that are just part of the mechanism of how the mind works, regardless of anything else. So things like attention, things like intention, things like experiencing some level of happiness or unhappiness or something like that. That's one category. Then the second category is constructive mental factors. So these are ways of types of mental experience that are the causes of joy, happiness, well-being. And then there are destructive mental factors. These are mental states that are the causes of suffering, also known as the afflictions, we could call them too. Well, one of the constructive types of mental factor is one that often does get translated in English as faith. I find that to be a misleading translation, but that is a common translation that you'll see. And so like sometimes you might hear like Lama Zopa Rinpoche saying, it's very important to have faith. It's very important to have faith. I can't speak for Rinpoche, but my understanding is that this is what Rinpoche is referring to, not the assumption one, this one. So what is this actually? This is referring to, Alex Berzin explains it as having a confident belief in something that you know to be true, basically. A confident belief in something that you know to be true. This would be the opposite of doubt, if doubt is the mind wavering back and forth between is it, isn't it, is it, isn't it, is it, isn't it, right? But the way the way this is defined, the way that this faith is defined, built into it is the understanding that you have to have arrived at it in a valid way. You have to have arrived at it in a reliable way. So I think the importance of this, I think, really became clear to me when I started working as a psychologist. I started working with clients who had generalized anxiety disorder. And in some instances, like, it became really clear to me that what was going on was that there was like a lack or a dearth of this mental factor in their daily lives. You know, so like, for example, I'm sitting on a chair right now, and I know this chair will support me, you know, through the rest of this conversation. Now, I mean, do I know that with 100% certainty? In this case, probably not. But I have faith that it will, if you get what I'm saying, you know? Whereas sometimes somebody with very severe generalized anxiety might sit here worried, like, what if the chair breaks? No, it's going to be okay. But what if it breaks? No, it's going to be okay. But what if it breaks? No, it's going to be okay. Right? And that's torture. That's just torture. So this level of kind of confidence in something that's fairly reliable, let's say, that's what's meant by faith in this context. So all of us have a need to have a lot of faith to get through the world. I mean, we need to, every time we take a step, we have to have faith that the ground is going to support us, you know, otherwise we're paralyzed. If we get in an airplane, we have faith that the pilot isn't going to purposely crash it into a mountain. We get into an Uber, we have faith in a million things. If we drive an Uber, and we're just bursting with faith in the goodness of humanity, right? And we need it. We need to be. We need to be. And this is no more so and no less so when it comes to matters of dharma than when it comes to just kind of everyday worldly matters. You know, if we have genuine reason to believe, like valid reason to believe, that a certain type of meditation practice will kind of give us increasing positive results, then it becomes a big obstacle if every time we're about to meditate, we kind of sit and say like, well, yeah, but what if it doesn't work? You know, no, but it probably will. But what if it doesn't? But it probably will, right? Now, mind you, this isn't the type of thing we can beat out of ourselves, nor do we want to. It's not like I have to have faith, you know? But this mental factor of faith, there are teachings on how to build it up in a valid and reliable way, but it's considered to be a desirable thing to have, right? And I'll also mention this briefly. This too is considered to have three types. There's three types of this positive kind of faith. The way Alex Berzin calls them, the first type is called belief in a fact based on reason, right? So that is kind of like relaxing with the knowledge of something once we've established it logically, right? Kind of like, as just like you guys can basically kind of relax with your knowledge that this glass still exists, even though it's out of frame, right? That's belief in a fact based on reason. The next one is, I find it such an interesting thing. Alex Berzin translates it as clear-headed belief in a fact. And I personally, I find something really beautiful in this, And I think it's something that on some level we can probably all relate to. But it's when it's this kind of calm confidence in what we know that we know, right? And this calm confidence, it kind of settles the turbulence of the mind. That's the idea. So it's like, it's increasingly difficult in this world of ours to come up with examples that won't be controversial. It used to be that the earth is round. It's a fairly straightforward example that you can give. But I mean, let's think of something ridiculous, right? Like, let's say that somebody came up to us. Well, let's start with this. Let's say that somebody came up to us and said, there's no such thing as rebirth, right? Now, depending on how far you are into engaging with Buddhism, I would say this, like, let's say this is how, like, you're more and more engaged with Buddhism as you kind of go along this way, right? There's this range in here in which that will really, really get your goat, right? When you're not too engaged, you're like, I don't know, whatever. Yeah. Or I agree. When you're very engaged, like, you're like, hey, how can you say that? And then when you get to a certain point, right? Like, you're like, okay, you do you, like, it's fine, that towards the end, that tail end there, that's the clear-headed, belief, as it were. If somebody came to you and said, the moon doesn't really exist, there's no such thing as the moon, you might get a little disturbed, just for, like, in terms of, like, what are you talking, like, where are you coming from? But you're not going to be like, it's like, I need to defend this, I need to prove this, I need to, like, there's something so out there about it that you're like, I mean, I don't know what to tell you, but okay. It's very calm, it's very clear-headed. I think the most beautiful image I know of it is when they say that when the Buddha became enlightened, Mara was like a representation of desire and delusion and all of that, said to him, how do I know that you're enlightened, or something like that. And the Buddha, he just touched the earth. He said, the earth is my witness. There's something, to me, so beautiful about it, because on the one hand, it's like, it doesn't prove anything, and it's the sense of having nothing to prove. Like, I see, I know where things are at. I see where things are. I'm okay. And then the third type of positive faith is belief in a fact with an aspiration. And this is kind of like this is when the thing that we're believing is something along the lines of, I see that it's possible and I can do it too. Right? Like, like, if we're in school and we're studying some subject, one of my favorite things to do in school was, at the beginning of every semester or every year, when we'd get the new textbooks, I'd look at the last chapter of the textbook. Like, let's say if it was math or something, and it was just complete and utter gobbledygook. I had no clue. And it really felt like, I will never understand this. It's impossible. Right? And then I like to do that because I'd like to tell myself, like, by the end of the year, I'll know what this means, and it's almost like magical and mystical somehow, right? But you get there, right? And there comes a point along the way where you can start to see, like, oh, I see how this is going to be possible, and I see that I can do it. I'm not there yet, but I see that it's not impossible, and I can do it too, right? That's like belief in a fact with an aspiration. like a magic trick. Oh yes, I knew I had felt this recently. I was trying to remember when it was, and I remember I saw a YouTube video that said they were going to teach you how to do a magic trick with cards, and then they first did the trick, and I said to myself, "Oh, that's impossible." You know, there's just no way. And then when they explained it, I was like, "Oh, there is a way," and I have to practice. I'm not going to be able to just do it, but I could do that too, right? Uh, so something like that. And of course, in Buddhism, this becomes really important when the thing that we have the aspiration about is liberation or enlightenment. You know, um, it's very positive when we get to a place where we can say, "Well, Lord knows that I'm not enlightened yet, and there's a few eons still to go," to put it charitably. And I can see that it's possible, and I can do it too, and I want to do it. So let me pause here again and ask for any thoughts, questions, comments, anything. Yes, please, Anna.
Hi, Gustavo. Just earlier when you were talking about dogma, and it just kind of, I'm 43. Am I? Yeah, I'm 40. No, I'm not. I'm 42. Sorry. But I've just kind of like realized that my whole life and outlook was probably based on dogma. What people have told me, what I've heard, what I've, it investigates a little bit more, you don't believe the BBC News, blah, 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 blah. But the majority of my life is a myth. Oh my gosh. So yeah, that's a
Thank you.
huge eye opener. And it's kind of a release in some respects, really. But it's quite
Yes.
amazing in others.
Yes. That's exactly right. That's exactly what the Buddha is saying. That's exactly right.
I
The
absolutely, sorry to jump in there, but just to jump on that, I reacted the same way when you went through dogma, and as far as arriving at faith in a valid way, the faith, and I think that that's one of my favorite aspects of Buddhism. And when I speak about it with my family, my wife in particular, that's one of her, the scientific approach, the scientific method. Try it, don't believe it. And then I go back to what Anna was saying and think about how many people I know that have never tried their faith. They've never tested it. It's just faith is faith, and that's beautiful. But this is even more beautiful.
I'm so glad. I'm so glad. Um, yeah, that's the whole thesis of the Buddha, really, is that we're walking through this world that is made up of the suffering of our own creation because of all of these unexamined assumptions that we have. Um, both in more almost like sociological terms, like these assumptions we have about other groups, these assumptions we have about other people, but and also like in a very, very deep and fundamental way in terms of the assumptions we have about how things exist in the first place, about what it is that we are. And the Buddha says that that is the root of all suffering. That is the root of all suffering. And that the way to end suffering is to overcome that, is to kind of recognize, oh my God, this thing that I've been assuming, that's just an assumption. And it turns out that it's not true. And the truth is the reverse of it, right? When we talk in Buddhism about realizing emptiness, emptiness is a very interesting choice of words. And it's a fair translation. I don't mean just in English. It's a very interesting choice of words. Because from one perspective, emptiness, it just means that that you're saying that something is not the case, right? So for something to be empty, it's always empty of something. It's not just empty, right? So for example, if my glass is full of water, but if I had a glass that was empty, right? And I say this glass is empty, what I mean is this glass is empty of liquid. It's full of air, right? Empty of liquid just means there is not liquid in it. Yeah. So I could say of myself, I am empty of being 7 feet tall. It's just a way of saying I'm not 7 feet tall. If you look for 7 feet tall here, it's not there. You're not going to find it, right? So empty just kind of means not. But then why don't we just say not? Why do we say empty? Because what we're pointing out is that there's the expectation that you'll find something. And then when you go to check, the thing isn't there, right? It's as if like you sip from the glass and then there's no water in it. It's like, oh, the glass is empty. It's a shock, right? You go to get your keys in the drawer. It's Venerable Rabina's example. Go to get your keys in the drawer. You open the drawer, the keys aren't there, right? You see the drawer is empty, right? And so there is one fundamental fact in Buddhism that the Buddha says is the root of all suffering. And this goes beyond the scope of what we're talking about today, but it has to do with something called inherent existence, not existence, but something called inherent existence. And the first thing that the Buddha does is he points out to us how we're all walking around with this assumption that things have this special type of existence called inherent existence. And then he says, now go look for it. And when we check, it's empty. It's empty of inherent existence, not empty of existence. Things absolutely exist. There's no doubt of that. Here I am, but inherent existence. We don't even realize that we're assuming it. Somebody has to explain to us what it means. And when we understand what it means, we'll realize, oh yeah, of course, I guess I've been assuming that all along. Now let me go check. Empty. It's empty, right? So the whole kit and caboodle, the whole mess of samsara is based on an unexamined assumption. It's really, really fascinating, I think. And what's really lucky is that an incorrect assumption is something that can be replaced, something that can be switched out for a correct understanding. And when you see something, you can't unsee it. You can assume if you're 94 years old, maybe you've been assuming for 92, maybe for the first 2 years you weren't thinking about it. So for the last 92 years, I've been assuming that there are rats in the closet. And so I have not opened the closet, right? It doesn't matter. It's been 2 years, 3 years, 92 years. I opened the closet. It's empty of rats. There are no rats there. I see it. It's over. It's gone, right? Well, you need to familiarize the mind with it. That's what meditation is, right? If you have the habit, you might kind of doubt. You might say, like, did I dream it? Are there no rats? So you go and you check again, right? You sit in the closet. You live in the closet. You see no rats, no rats, no rats. Eventually, the mind becomes one with this understanding of no rats, of emptiness of rats. And then it's over. There's nowhere for the assumption to go. There's nothing for the assumption to transform into. It's just gone. The mind might be holding on to this wrong assumption. The universe, the truth of the world, stands as evidence of the other side. So there's no contest. There's no contest. A mistake on the one hand in the mind versus the truth spoken by the entire universe on the other. It's not a fair fight. That's why there's hope. That's why there's so much hope. because it doesn't matter how long you've been fundamentally, tightly grasping onto a mistaken view. If you investigate, you'll find it, the truth, and then it's all over from there. That's why they say, I forget if it's Nagarjuna who says, but they say that even doubting whether emptiness might be true, right? Even if you think maybe things are empty of inherent existence. First, you have to understand what inherent existence is before you can do that. But even doubting it begins to shatter the roots of samsara. It's very powerful stuff. Anyway, what other thoughts, questions about what we were just talking about right now, or more open about anything else? Yes, please.
One of the assumptions that I read and hear about with Buddhism that I have a hard time wrapping my head around is this concept of the precious human birth. I've spent a good bit of my life trying to cultivate a sense of like anti-speciesism, where,
Wonderful.
you know, I think that I'm really good at being a human and my cat is really good at being a cat.
Yes.
And I don't see that my life or my existence is more precious than hers.
Yes.
So I feel like in a political, getting more political, I guess, is that this concept of humans being at a higher status allows us as a species to exploit not only other animals, but it translates into, you know, more discernment between, you know, it brings up all the isms, you know, the racism, the sexism, and also it allows us to pretty much abuse our planet. And none of this actually, if we are more precious, we're not really receiving any bounties of all this behavior because we're kind of killing ourselves with, you know, the way we treat our home planet.
Absolutely.
So I struggle with that, and I can't, it's like a big roadblock for me
Sure.
in embracing this, because I feel like I have to see myself as a higher status because I was
I
born
understand.
human. So I was wondering if you could comment on that for me.
Absolutely. And thank you so much, because and thank you for not just asking, but for struggling with that, because that is like, I mean, this is a judgment on my part, I suppose, but like your objection is coming from the best possible place. I'm so glad. I'm so glad. So let me speak a little bit to that. Did we mention anything last time about the three wisdoms, the wisdom of listening? Did we talk about that? No, not yet. Okay, not yet. I couldn't remember. That's okay. Never mind. I won't approach from that angle. So let me say this. Buddhism, I would suggest that part of what hurts us so much when we hear that as Westerners is that we're bringing in this is part of it, not all of it, but I'll get to the rest too, that we are bringing in an assumption that Buddhism doesn't share. We're bringing in an assumption that there is a fundamental difference between humans and cats. I'll just use humans and cats. Some of us are humans and some of us are cats, right? And so if one of those has a precious rebirth, then it follows that that one is more important than the other, right? Buddhism would say that, and let me say this, if you say, well, yes, but I don't believe in rebirth, that's fine. If you don't believe in rebirth, there's no such thing as a precious human rebirth. That makes no sense. That only makes sense within the context of rebirths, right? So within the context that Buddhism is saying, it's the context of rebirths, none of us is human and none of us is cat. All of us are just going around the merry-go-round, and we're just in different positions at different times, right? So, you know, my dog Snoopy, I've been his dog countless times. He's been my dog countless times. We've been human siblings countless times and dog siblings countless times. And sometimes one of us was a giraffe and the other was an eagle, and everything. And there's nothing about me that makes me somehow innately more human than him or him more dog than me. It's just where we are in position to each other at this moment in time, right? Tomorrow we'll die and it will be the reverse. That's one piece. And then we have to understand what it is that we're saying when we're saying that the human rebirth is precious. We are not saying that humans are more precious than other beings. We're not saying that. We're talking about the opportunity. It's a precious opportunity. I don't think that humans are superior to other animals. I don't think that humans are superior to other beings in general, but we tend to think of other beings as animals, you know? I don't think that humans are superior to animals. There are certain ways in which we could even argue that some animals are superior to human. I mean, if I had the kind of patience and faithfulness that Snoopy has, like, I'd be a bodhisattva, you know? And every species has unique characteristics of its own, right? Neither Snoopy nor I can echolocate the way a bat can, right? I think that's fair, right? Like, it's not too controversial, right? I certainly can't smell things that Snoopy can smell, like, at all, like, whatsoever, you know? I would argue that doesn't make him superior to me. That's just something, like some ability that he currently has that I don't currently have. Is this kind of fair so far? Yeah. So humans, just like all other species, we have some abilities that are, whether unique to us or like that we have like more of, you know, like dogs are very good with smell relative to most other animals, is my understanding. Bats, I'm sure, are good at echolocation more than just about any other animal. I don't know, maybe whales, I don't know. You could say that, you know, cheetahs are good at speed, like land speed, more than any other animal. Well, human beings, we're good at abstract thinking more than any other animal, it seems, right? That doesn't make us better. That doesn't make us more precious, right? It's just one thing that we have. And one way that I think about this is that every veterinarian you ever meet is a human being, right? It's not because we're kinder. It's not because we're better. It's because there is a tool that we have. Like every being that sniffs for drugs at an airport is a dog, and every being who does medical treatment for other beings is a human. It's that this is our gift, as it were. It's we tend to call it intelligence, I guess, right? Well, that in itself doesn't make human rebirth that precious either. You know, it's just a gift like any other. However, from a Buddhist point of view, cats and dogs and chickens and ants, just as much as us, are stuck in samsara, are stuck in a cycle of suffering, dissatisfaction, pain. We're all rotating around these different forms. We're all stuck the same way, and for the same reason. The reason being this fundamental misassumption that we have, this fundamental misunderstanding that we have. That's the Buddhist claim. And if you go to a human being who's interested and you explain to them, here's what's causing all this pain. Here's what's at the heart of this problem. Here's how you can understand the emptiness of it. A human being is able to follow that and do something with it. But as the teacher Geshe Thupten Supa, he said, if you say to a hen, he said, to a hen, you have to understand emptiness, the hen will look at you like you're crazy, right? So what it is that right now we happen to be in a position where we can reach the exit and we can help bring others with us. And next time when we're dogs and cats, we won't be in that position anymore. We'll be in a position to do lots of other things, but not that. But because in Buddhism, that is the most important thing, this is considered a very precious opportunity, right? So the way that I think about it is I imagine that we're all sentient beings equally are on a giant merry-go-round, right? And, you know, I've never actually seen this, but my understanding is that it used to be that when like, you know, 100 years ago or something, merry-go-rounds would have like a brass ring. And when you were riding by, you're supposed to reach for the ring, and whoever like caught the ring would get a prize or something like that, right? And everybody has a turn, you know, like when you get near the ring, you can reach for it, but when you're not near the ring, you can't, right? Well, we're in a merry-go-round that it takes several billion eons to make a full turn, right? So when we have the opportunity to grab the ring, it's kind of like now or never. It's going to be several billion eons before we have another chance. So it's a very precious moment. It's a very precious opportunity, right? That's what I think it's like. You know, all of us, me and Snoopy and the ants who live in the house, all of us are in the same merry-go-round. We're equal, we're the same. None of us is worth more than any other, you know? And right now, I have the opportunity to grab this brass ring that will help not just me, but also Snoopy and the ants and everybody. All eyes are on me at this moment. It's my responsibility at this moment. It's a very precious opportunity. I can't miss the ring as best I can, right? If I miss it, it will be Snoopy's turn next, probably, you know? And then all eyes will be on him or her. How does that feel?
Yeah, that explains it really well. And I guess I would be okay with also seeing Snoopy as having a precious Snoopy rebirth. You know, is that
Yes.
because
Oh,
he's
yes.
contributing something?
Oh, yes. Of course. Of
Okay,
course. Of
that makes it
course.
great. Thank you so
Oh,
much.
I'm glad. Yes. Let me even say just a little bit more about that. We're only talking about precious, like when we say precious human rebirth, we're only talking about precious from one perspective. There are so many precious things that all sentient beings have and bring. Humans and non-human, like even as humans, there are many precious things that we do besides have the chance to grab the ring, you know? That just kind of focus, like if we focus on the goal of getting everybody out of samsara, you know, the most precious opportunity is when we happen to, and it's not just human isn't enough. Human isn't enough. Like being a human being and having a precious human rebirth are not the same thing, right? To have a precious human rebirth, you need not only to be a human being, there's a whole list, I'll just mention a few things, but you need to be in a place where there is access to these teachings that teach you how to get out, you know? Again, notice this isn't some remark about people's worth. It's not that people who are living in communist China are worth less than us, God forbid, of course not, you know? It's just that right now they don't have that precious opportunity that we do in having access to the Dharma. You need to not have a very profound intellectual disability that would prevent you from understanding. For the same reason, you see, it's not the human that's precious. It's not. It's the opportunity that's precious. It's not a precious human rebirth. It's a precious human rebirth. It's a precious rebirth, right?
You've really cleared this up for me, and I can't thank you enough.
Oh, I'm
You've made
so
all this,
glad.
it's life-changing. What
Oh,
you've done. So
wow.
thank
Oh,
you.
I'm so glad. Thank you for
Yeah.
telling me that. That just makes my week. All right. Oh, who's next? Let's change some more lives.
It's changing lives on a Sunday morning. You hit on something that I just wanted to ask, just for a little more of a nugget, if you have something for us. Just the inherent existence as being kind of the root of, or the unexamined assumption of inherent existence, and the Buddha teaching that that is the root of our suffering. So I wanted to ask if maybe you just had any more, knowledge you could drop on that subject.
Oh, sure. The question is, what will we do with all the rest of our time after I answer that?
Yeah, I thought maybe
Gosh.
I should mention, I know it's a heck of a topic, so briefly, yeah.
Well, sir, no, it's a very important question. And one thing that I can say with some confidence is that there isn't enough time for me to explain what the idea of inherent existence means. Okay, it's very simple, but it's very subtle. And what usually happens is that it's almost like you're trying to land on the blade of a razor, like an extremely thin blade, and usually what will happen is you'll land a little bit on the left or you'll land a little bit on the right. It's very difficult to kind of land right where you're trying to land, and understanding what is meant by inherent existence. But it's simple. It's interesting. It's simple. The only reason it's so difficult for us is because our minds are so trained in dividing the world into two, like without accounting for this space here. Like it's like our minds are so trained in thinking it's either this or it's that. Like we can't even quite see, it's like it's as if like something is either on top of the piece of paper or under the piece of paper, and we kind of forget to account for those like micrometers of space like within the piece of paper. So for that reason, I'm not going to try to cram in an explanation of what inherent existence means, but I will say this. Inherent existence is something that doesn't exist at all. Again, like books and people and trees and humans and dogs, like those exist. That inherent existence doesn't exist. But without realizing it, we assume that it exists. And then what's worse is this: on the basis of that assumption, like we've rehearsed that assumption so much that our senses are now collaborating with it, as it were. Things appear to us as if they inherently existed. If you look at, I'll just keep using the glass of water. If you look at a glass of water, your eyes are creating the appearance of an inherently existing glass of water. If you wanted to know what an inherently existing glass of water would look like, it would look something like this, right? And so first we have to challenge the assumption, and we can see that we can establish without doubt that the assumption is wrong. And then we have to train our minds to become familiar with the denial of that assumption, with the negation of that assumption. We have to train our minds to understand that things don't inherently exist. And then in time, the senses will also start letting go of that. Sounds very mysterious when I say it that way, I'm afraid. It's not magical. Let me see if I can think of an example. I can think of an example: constellations. there are no constellations in the sky. There are countless stars, that have nothing to do with each other in some sense. But each culture has connected the dots quite literally in different ways, And so at some point, somebody teaches you, see that star and that star and that star. Like, look, if you trace it, like, let's say, doesn't it look like a man? That's Orion. That's in the Western tradition. And so at first, we need to make the effort to see it. But after a while, when you look up, I personally, if I look up into the sky and I see Orion's belt, I see Orion's belt. Like, how can I put this? I still see 3 stars, but they appear to me as a group. They appear to me as being their own thing. It's not like I have to think like, wait, that one and that one and that one, are they all part? Yes. Like, it just automatically to my eyes appears as a trio of stars, right? If we rehearsed like that for several eons, we'd get to a point where we wouldn't be able to see it as anything else. Like, we wouldn't be able, like, it would appear to us as if there's one thing there from its own side. At that point, we'd have to first establish that that's not so. We'd have to establish that that's not true. And then we'd have to train at, let's say, for the sake of the example, at looking at it as, okay, one star, completely separate from anything else. All right, one star. Oh, actually, that's not even one star. It's a cluster of stars. Oh my gosh. Okay, cluster of stars. And if we did that enough, we'd untrain ourselves from seeing it as one, right? So in a similar way, it's not a perfect analogy, but in a similar way, we've trained so much in seeing things as inherent that they already appear to us as inherent. And we need to first establish that it's not so, and then start to dismantle that through practice. So when we first have the insight, so first we have to understand what does inherent existence mean. Then we have to check and we have to recognize, oh my gosh, that's right. That is how I see everything. And then we have to say, well, why is Buddha saying that that's not true? And then we need to learn the proofs. And then we need to really internalize it and understand it. So it's not just a correct assumption with a valid reason. And then eventually we'll get to a moment where it will kind of hit us like a ton of bricks. Like the penny will drop. We'll suddenly be like, oh my God, things aren't inherently existent. Inherent existence doesn't exist. And at that point, you know what you've just had? Nothing, an insight, that's all. You've just had an insight, okay? From there, you can start meditating on emptiness, really, truly meditate. Of course, we want to try it before that, but then you can truly be meditating on emptiness. And eventually, you'll get to a point where you'll be able to see, like, just to use my analogy, you'll be able to see 3 stars instead of seeing a belt. That moment, you've had a realization of emptiness. You've had a direct experience. Your senses themselves, so to speak, have shown you what things really look like without the assumption of inherent existence. And that will last for just a little bit. And then you'll kind of go back into the world of the illusion again. And so then you have to practice. When the illusion no longer reestablishes itself, that's when you've attained liberation. Okay? That's when you've attained nirvana. When there is no longer at any moment, not even for an instant, the illusion of inherent existence. You've stopped believing in it a long time ago. You've completely stopped believing it, but it still appears to you. Have you ever done virtual reality? I highly recommend it, both for dharmic and non-dharmic reasons, right? I love it. I have a virtual reality set. And And I also have a fear of heights, right? And so there's this virtual reality app where you can go and you can ride this elevator up this building, and you can walk out on the roof and you can step onto this plank and see, like, and it's so real. And when I'm doing it, I intellectually know that I'm standing on the ground in my home on the ground floor. But I'm terrified because it's appearing to me in a different way, right? So it's very similar. Most of us, in terms of emptiness of inherent existence, most of us, we're starting in the virtual reality world without any kind of thought that it's virtual reality. We believe that we're standing on a plank, right? That's where we start from. Then we hear, the Buddha says that we all believe that this is not virtual reality, but that it really is. And so first we're like, okay, what on earth does virtual reality mean? Right? And then we have to understand, what would real life be relative to virtual? And then we understand it. It's like, okay, so then why is the Buddha saying that this is virtual reality and not real? And then we can learn the proof and go, oh, okay. And then at some point it will hit us and we'll say, oh, this is virtual reality. This isn't true. I'm on the ground floor, really. It's like the Matrix, right? But it will still appear to us as real. At this point, nothing has happened yet. At this point, like in terms of like markers on the path, like at this point, I've had an insight and I get it, and I don't like intellectually believe it anymore when I think about it, but I'm still just as afraid as ever. Just about more or less. There's benefit, of course, there's benefit. Well, then I need to start familiarizing myself with that. Then I need to start within that virtual reality world that I am. I need to start looking at the pixels. I need to start staring. It's like seeing if I can catch the pixels. And at some point, I don't know, like, let's say like I kind of like cross my eyes, whatever I do, at some point, I'll see the pixels. I won't see the plank anymore. I won't see the building anymore. I'll see the pixels. I've just had a realization of emptiness, right? Metaphor, just to be clear. I'm not saying that's what emptiness is and realizing that things are atoms. That's not what I'm saying, right? Metaphor. But a realization of emptiness. I've seen it for myself. It's not just something that I've intellectually deduced. I've just experienced it. That's what's actually there. It's pixels, right? And then once I kind of relax, it will look like there's the plank again, right? My fear will be less, but it will still be there. And I'll practice until I get to a place where my mind settles on seeing just the pixels. When my mind settles on seeing just the pixels, so that it's no longer experiencing a plank in the first place, that's liberation. Roughly speaking, I'm oversimplifying it a little bit, but let's go with that. However, that's not enlightenment. Because if I'm seeing pixels everywhere, I can't be of any help to anybody else who's stuck in virtual reality, you see? So enlightenment means that I have to keep practicing for a lot longer until I can get to a place where I can see both at the same time. I can see both the pixels and the plank. And I'll always understand from now on, I'll always understand what the plank is and isn't. I'll always understand that it's really pixels, but I need to be able to see the plank so I can help others navigate that situation. So I can help give instructions, etc. That's an oversimplification, but I think it gives a little bit of the idea. Is that helpful?
In the world and not of the world. Yes, thank you.
What else?
Gustavo,
Yes.
thank you so much. I love the imagery that you're giving us. It's very helpful. Now, I know we don't have a lot of time left, but I would love your your ideas on how we might be able to understand non-duality. Thank
Oh,
you.
you guys and your easy questions. Non-duality, eh? Okay. Well, let me start by saying that there are different systems of explanation in Buddhism that are kind of like on a graduated hierarchy. It's a little bit like I remember as a kid, like you see the sun and you think you know what you're seeing, like it's this small ball of fire in the sky. And I remember being taught that no, actually the sun is very, very big. It's so much bigger than the earth. The sun is very big. Well, I just jumped up a level in understanding, right? It's like the next level of explanation. Now I know something more clearly than I did before. And then a few years after that, I was taught that actually the sun is very, very small. Like other stars are much bigger than the sun, right? So it seems like a contradiction, but it's actually a step forward. I didn't lose my previous understanding. I gained something else, right? And so that's like the next level up, right? And so you see how we can teach things in different levels of complexity. There's actually a series on YouTube where they have experts explain the same thing in 5 different levels of complexity. It's like they explain it to a child, they explain it to a teenager, they explain it to a college student, then to a graduate student, then to an expert in the field, right? And you see how they give different types of explanations to each. So the same thing happens in Buddhism. There's a system of explaining the whole thing on a more introductory level, second, third, fourth, and so on. So when we ask about non-duality, the way that will be explained will be different on these different levels. So one of the levels of explanation is called Chittamatra, or also known as Yogacara. That's like in the second half, like the higher half, like it's more advanced. And that level of explanation deals a lot with the relationship between phenomena and our perceptions of phenomena, our experiences of phenomena. And it talks a lot about how we don't really have access to any phenomenon outside of our experience of that phenomenon, right? Sorry, you ask a deep question. I don't know what else I can do. And so, from the perspective of that level of explanation, we would speak of non-duality as being the non-duality between subject and object, the non-duality between what is experienced and the experiencing of it.
Hey, Gustavo,
Yes,
because when you're talking about Snoopy,
yes.
as I try to put my mind around, I know it's a deep subject, but sometimes it comes up. I was thinking that, like, you are Gustavo and you are Snoopy. You and Snoopy and all of us, all beings, are one. Is that another way to, do I have a right view?
I gotcha. Okay.
And honestly,
Yes.
friend, you don't have, I know we don't have much time, and I'm sorry.
No, no,
But,
no, no, no. That's
but
okay.
I really struggle with that idea.
Yeah,
you.
no, of course, of course, of course, of course. Well, you might be surprised to learn that from a Buddhist point of view, at the very least within the Gelug school of Tibetan Buddhism, at the very least, we wouldn't really say that we are all one. I'm sorry, that might be heartbreaking. I'm sorry, but we wouldn't really say that. We can say that in a like we can say that in a non-literal way, you know, like there's a deep, powerful, profound truth that is carried by the sentence, we are all one, you know, like we're all in this together. There's no fundamental difference in value between us. You know, our essences are the same essences. But we're not one undifferentiated soup. And we never will be from the Gelug point of view. The Gelug point of view is that even when we're enlightened, each of us will experience our own enlightenment, not just one common shared enlightenment between us. Now, I think where that question tends to arise from is from what's called in Buddhism the two truths. And the two truths, there are two levels of looking at things, at anything. We can look at something from the perspective of what it is. I think I'll just say this briefly. For the sake of time, I'm going to say it in an oversimplified way. So put an asterisk at the end of this, okay? But I'm going to say we can look at something from the perspective of what it is on the surface versus what it is ultimately. When we talk about being distinct or being one, when we talk about Snoopy and I, are we distinct or are we one? That question is operating on the surface level. That's not an ultimate type of question. If you say, are you ultimately distinct or are you ultimately one, then you haven't understood the word ultimately. Things can't be ultimately one. Things can't be ultimately distinct. When you understand what ultimately means in Buddhism, that question makes no sense. So if you say on the surface, are you distinct? On the surface, are you one? That's a valid question. And then the answer is very clear. On the surface, we are distinct. You can talk about Snoopy, you can talk about me. Something can happen to Snoopy without happening to me. Something can happen to me without happening to Snoopy, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Now, to kind of come back to something we were saying before, there's a sense in which Snoopy and I are the same, and that we're both sentient beings. We both have Buddha nature. We both have clear light mind. We both want happiness and don't want suffering just as much as each other. You know, we're both deserving of that just as much as each other. So we are, quote, unquote, the same in those ways, in those senses. But it doesn't mean that we're one being, we're the same being. So then how does this relate to non-duality? On this level, like in terms of this type of question, I think what we would say about non-duality is that it's not that there is an absolute non-duality. That's not true. It's that there is a non-absolute duality. Like there is no such thing as an absolute duality, right? The distinction that exists between me and Snoopy does exist on the surface level. It does not exist on an absolute, deepest, ultimate level. But neither does any sameness. well, you ask a simple question, you get a simple answer, right? Sameness and difference are only ever surface, right? It's not that difference is surface, but sameness is ultimate. No, that's a misunderstanding, right? The whole question of sameness and difference is surface. On the deepest level, the question doesn't apply, right? So therefore, the duality is only on the surface level too. So non-duality really, I think that the deepest sense of non-duality is the non-duality of the two levels. Is that even though I'm saying there's a surface level and there's the absolute level, that itself is not a duality in an absolute sense. It's two different ways of looking at the same thing. It's two different ways of looking at the same thing. Remember how I said asterisk, but in an asterisk? You know, here's a brief explanation of an asterisk. It's not really true to say that that the two truths are what exists on the surface level and what exists on the absolute level. More accurate would be to say that surface truth is to ask what exists, and absolute truth would be to ask in what way does it exist? Right? Okay.
Yes, got it.
Oh, good.
It's super helpful because especially that you put it in the context of Buddhism, because you hear it, duality and non-duality, as it refers to other philosophies, I guess.
Yes.
So it's super helpful. Thank you.
Oh, good. I'm glad.
Thank you.
All right. Well, this brings us to our time today. So thank you all so much. Let's take a moment now to dedicate, to give a direction to whatever positive potential might have been created here. And so we think again that the ripples of our actions and of our choices here today will continue to reverberate in the mind. And to extend this analogy, will kind of grow into waves. And so these waves will push us in directions. And so may they push us only in directions that will bring us deeper and deeper into a correct understanding of reality. That will bring us deeper and deeper into a very genuine, heartfelt sense of caring, compassion, loving kindness for all beings. And therefore, by the combination of those, that will bring us closer and closer and closer to complete enlightenment, so it can be of best possible benefit to all universal sentient beings as quickly as possible. Thank you so much. Thank you all very much. I hope you guys have a wonderful week. I'll look forward to seeing you again, same bad time, same bad channel next week. All right.
Thank you.